After having a successful experience with Don Davis on a prior project, the Wachowskis brought him on for The Matrix. They didn't want a traditional score, they wanted something unique, and Don Davis delivered. I know other big soundtrack analysis channels have covered the score to a degree, but I'm going to try to include everything that has been found, including my own additions and multiple examples of each. If you haven't checked those channels out and videos out, I highly recommend them as they have their own style and way of explaining everything. But if you're ready to take the red pill, let's dive into the amazing score to The Matrix. This score is very dense, and it's not going to be possible to really analyze it and follow it in the same way as other scores. Instead, I've divided this video into 15 sections to highlight the musical ideas, and if you're not strong on musical analysis theory or music in general, I'll do my best to explain everything as we go. Many of these concepts do relate to one another, so there will be a little bit of overlap. And this is most likely why none of the other channels have tried to show more than what they did. But I'm giving it a go, so let's get started. There's no better place to start than the cue names. Yeah, not the music or anything, but the cue names themselves, as we have some puzzles all ready to point out. While many of the cues are just named after the scenes they are for or some rhyming pun, some of them actually have some extra meaning. Bow Whisk Orchestra is an anagram for the Wachowski brothers, and so are Switch or Break Show, Shake Borrow Switch, Switch Works Her Boa, Switch Walks Her Boar, and Whoa Switch Brokers. I think Don's favorite character was Switch. Those aren't the only anagrams though. The cues Threat Mix, Exit Mr. Hat, and Mix the Art are anagrams for The Matrix. I really can't touch on any of the music until I talk about mirroring throughout. As other channels have pointed out, there's this mirror imagery all over the film, from the Matrix identity to the real-world identity to the machines versus the humans. This is also a thing in the score. The main example is the opening chords. We have a minor chord against a major chord, and Ethan over at Sideways showed using the clock diagram that any major chord is a mirror of a minor chord. The only glitch here is that not every time this idea pops up is it a major and a minor chord. Right in the first cue, we have a major against a major. I will also give a shout out to Inside the Score who called this motif the bending the rules motif. Diatonicism refers to notes you typically find in a 7-note scale, like the major scale, and chromaticism refers to when notes are the closest interval to one another and part of the chromatic scale, or a scale that uses all 12 notes. Davis uses these two concepts to represent humanity and the machines, and he does it in many ways, but some prominent moments to note here would be the stacked chord clusters that are slowly built. Inside the Score and Listening In both reference the final fight between Smith and Neo, where both of these ideas are traded off. In his dissertation, Heckman points out the machine and human ostinati as well, and we can hear and see the difference between the diatonic and chromatic elements.
Answers are coming.
I'm supposed to start with this operation programs first.
While primarily a scale taught in association with Stravinsky, the octatonic scale is still used today in film scores. I've noticed a trend of tension or maybe a hint of mystery with its use, like right before the dinosaurs are revealed in Jurassic Park or the sword duel in Curse of the Black Pearl. While still true here in The Matrix, there's another hidden aspect to it that no one else has mentioned. While the chromatic scale has all half-step intervals and the diatonic scale have mostly whole step, what do you get when you mix a half and a whole step? The octatonic scale. So, in scenes where we have some tension between the machines and humanity, we get the octatonic scale. I'm serious, this score is meta to the max. Chris Heckman's dissertation has a short section about the Dorian mode, but I think there's more to this. Since the majority of the score is in minor or chromatic, Heckman makes note of the raised 6 to make the scale Dorian. He mentions that Davis uses this to signify change in scene and character development, and I very much agree with this. But what this does is it introduces us to a little bit more of a major sound. The score does not contain a lot of major tonality. That makes the hammered in B-flat major chord during the climax so effective. Even further is a seemingly strange choice by having the Wagner tuba blast the third of the chord. When balancing a chord, you want to have a strong root, which would be a B-flat in this case. The second most important would be the 5th, and the lowest priority would be the 3rd. So that's usually not the loudest note, but it is here. The reason is because the 3rd signifies whether a chord is major or minor, and since the whole score has mostly been minor, now we have our savior coming out and is a true believer in himself. So Davis has the 3rd really loud to strongly signal that Neo is indeed the one. And that would be my argument why The Matrix has the perfect ending. Trinity is the only character that gets a full-out theme, but it's not used in the same way you'd really expect. When it appears, it's almost always fragmented into 3 notes, because Trinity, tri, meaning 3. And it's also always hard to hear in the context of the film, at least until the climax at the end. This is for 2 reasons. One is because of nature of movies in general, where more recently film scores have been placed lower in the mix and is intended to be something more so felt rather than heard. This is why you most likely can't sing a melody from a recent movie, but older themes from films from like the 80s, maybe even the 70s, stick into your head. This is also why I make versions of movies with the music either soloed out or boosted so we can hear things better. The other reason this theme is hidden is because of the growth that is now allowed. The theme starts very hidden, but as the prophecy told to Trinity and her love for the One becomes more true, so does the theme. In the final statement of the theme in the climax, Heckman points out that it's in Dorian, but I'm going to add another layer to it. While I 100% agree with his analysis, if we isolate just her theme, it actually suggests Lydian, a mode described as having hopefulness and rise or heavenly, and is more major than the major scale. Some would say it's brighter than the major scale. And I think that's very appropriate here.
Did you go to her?
Yes.
What did she tell you?
Might as well hit the other main themes to the score while we're here. Agent Smith has a short motif that appears in a handful of times in the score. It consists of only 3 notes total, and as Ethan points out in his video, the smallest amount of information that we need to know whose side Smith is on. Unfortunately, isn't easily heard, so here are the instances of it with only the music playing. Related to Smith's theme is the Squiddy musical idea. It's a series of 3-note collections, and the 3 notes are all a half step apart. The way this is presented in the film really gives a bug-like sound, as Heckman points out, and it definitely is related to Flight of the Bumblebee. The death theme occurs 3 times, but it's enough to foreshadow Neo's, well, quote, death at the end of the movie, occurring for Mouse's and Dozer's deaths prior. This style of writing is, as Ethan calls it, Sudoku from hell. It was something very few students enjoyed making in college, and it's a concept that makes all notes, or what is now called pitch classes, equal. And honestly, after trying to write my own way of explaining this, I really can't top what Ethan said, so here's his explanation.
So the thing is that with serialism, the artistry and technique comes from how you utilize these patterns of notes or tone rows. If I have this tone row, I could play it upside down, which is called inversion. I could play it backwards, which is called retrograde, or I can play it backwards and upside down, which is called retrograde inversion. And each of these transformations can be transposed, which means I can move it up or down a certain number of notes. And so we represent these transformations with a P for prime, or the original tone row, I for inversion, R for retrograde, and RI for retrograde inversion. Then we put a little number next to it to show the transposition, or how many notes away from the original our new row has moved. So I could play my tone row upside down and backwards, 5 semitones above where it started, and we call that RI5. If you're lost, then good, it means you're human. This is as advanced as music theory gets before you start talking about set theory, Schenkerian analysis, and just straight up inventing your own tuning systems. But when you have all these permutations of a tone row, you can arrange them in this 12 by 12 grid that outlines everything that's going on. And we call this 12 by 12 grid that arranges all of our tone rows a matrix. This pun is not beyond Heckman, who not only explains the pun, but also worked out the matrix for the matrix.
Now, Ethan says that Heckman figured out the matrix for the matrix, but I want to show you how it was determined and how it's not that hard to do. What you need to look for is a section that seems to not fit into any scale and seem to have a lot of accidentals, especially sharps and flats mixed. That first appears in the opening cue, so all we need to do is write down our first 12 notes and see if they are all different. Since they are here, we can then figure out our matrix for the score. Now for my typical question of why. Why was this the row that Davis wanted to go with? I've tried figuring out different ways this row could have been put together, and the only tidbit that I noticed is that it's a series of whole steps representing humanity and diatonicism. Kinda. We do start in E minor, so maybe our key centers throughout the movie are the row? That'd be cool, but no, we actually end in D flat major. So there might not be an answer, but I certainly wanted to find it. Also, funny note, the last 3 notes of the row are the Back to the Future theme. When I was in school, I never understood the logic behind selecting certain rows, and at least at the time, I wasn't entirely sure how to figure it out. Since there's so much deliberate application of these concepts in the score, there has to be a method to Davis's madness. The transposition numbers from the start of the opening cue to the end are mirrors of each other, so there's something, and it falls into our mirroring category. Heckman also points out the other cues that this is used, and I've sadly not been able to figure out any meaning to them. The only thing to note is this section where the notes are not correct and don't fit into any row, and this is most likely just an error by Davis and doesn't mean anything really. He was on a time crunch with only a month to write the score and create demo tracks. Davis was very much influenced by the minimalistic textures of John Adams, while I noticed the short Ride on a Fast Machine connection inside the score, and Chris Heckman pointed out the style from Harmony Layer as well. During the cue Unable to Speak, Davis uses aleatory or chance music. In this section, each instrument is given a string of notes to play and a rhythm, but either of those could be subject to the player as well. They repeat these sections on their own way, and some voices joining and leaving in at different times. This creates the ultimate chaos aurally until the horns rip into a loud note into the next cue. Many cues contain polyrhythms, or many rhythmic divisions happening at the same time. This is used as an aural placement for multiple planes of existence. And probably the best cue to demonstrate this is after Neo took the red pill and we have a crossing of his real-world self and his Matrix self.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real?
But this is really contained in a lot of cues, with quite often there being a 4-on-3 polyrhythm, which creates 7 notes total per beat. Speaking of the number 7, given the subtonality of the writing of the story, Davis wanted to do the same with the music, and the most deep is probably the use of the number 7, which is described by Jordan Gray in numerology as, quote, oneness. Here's a quote from Gray's book, The Seventh Major Understanding. In numerology, the number 7 resonates with the energy of seeking answers and finding truth. Oneness reveals the nature of our reality, and it answers many questions about our existence. And I couldn't agree more with Chris Heckman that this fits Neo and the Matrix perfectly. To be clear, this is but one system of numerology.
Get in.
Hey, Pop. Are we online? Almost. Time is always against us. Please.
The voice is used in this score to represent humanity, like when we see the human pod power plant when Neo is awakened. A boy soprano is utilized in the following scene with Neo's muscles are being rebuilt. This was a late addition to the score, but it adds another layer of depth to it.
First century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
What the hell are they after me?
I don't know what it is.
Shit! That's my phone! This is insane.
This is really just the building blocks required to understanding the score. So let me know if you'd like to see a cue by cue breakdown and how each of these concepts work in the score. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the music to The Matrix in the comments down below. But until next time.